Okay, so for the case study, I'd like to just look at the anthropometry section of your ABCDE. So your baseline anthropometry that you'll need to gather to do an appropriate case study. So as a fundamental, you're going to need weight. You should document and in real life encourage your athlete to make sure they're weighed using appropriate protocols. So after the first morning void and nude or with minimal clothing. And that should be consistent throughout your intervention. You're going to need their height as well. So if possible, take it yourself. If not, give them guidance on how to measure it. Might use reported, but it tends to be inaccurate. You need to then use their weight and height to calculate their BMI. So although your participant is an athlete, BMI is a screening tool that we use to identify underweight and overweight. And athletes are often at risk of being underweight. And yeah, you just have to calculate your BMI in grams per kilogram, or sorry, kilograms per meter squared. Make sure that you document that. It's just a baseline tool. You can then say whether you feel it's appropriate or not, depending on how active your client is. Then you're going to want to look at that breakdown between fat and muscle, because weight and height obviously may not be sufficient for an athlete. So we want to get an idea of, especially if there's some kind of body composition intervention going on, so your athlete is trying to gain or lose weight. So there are a couple of options for assessing body fat and body muscle. So we've got skin folds. At undergraduate level, you may have done these in your labs, but you're not fully qualified. It's only a 6-week intervention, so if you don't have much experience with skin folds, you might find that they're not very accurate over a 6-week intervention, which isn't going to show enormous changes. So my suggestion would probably be to leave the skin folds. What you could use is BIA, bioelectrical impedance analyzer, so the Tanita. That would probably reduce your error as a practitioner. You could borrow one of them from Luke and Craig in the lab, and you could monitor at baseline, halfway, and at end, or even just at baseline and end. Girths can be really useful. So if your participant, you don't see them very often face to face, you can teach them how to monitor their own girths. So a waist girth, a hip girth, and a mid-upper arm circumference girth can be some really useful ones. Calf, thigh are also valuable as well, and bust or chest. So they're quite easy to teach somebody how to take themselves, and they can be really useful in identifying if there is a weight maintenance, but a reduction in waist and hip girth. That would suggest that your athlete has had a reduction in body fat and probably an increase in muscle mass because the weight has stayed the same, but their girths have reduced. Or you might find an increase in arm circumference, and that would suggest in an area like that where there might be minimal fat anyways, an increase in muscle mass. So girths can be really useful for this kind of case study. The other things that you can use with anthropometry are strength tests. So 1 rep max for squat, bench press, or deadlift. They're absolute strength tests, so they don't depend on your own weight. They don't change with weight. So if in my intervention, I'm the client and I gain 10 kilos, and my 1 rep max increases, that's great. It's just that I've gained at least some muscle. Whereas let's say we've got the opposite. I've lost 10 kilos and you're testing me with sprinting or counter movement jump. So I've done a 10-meter sprint at the beginning, and I've improved my 10-meter sprint over the 6 weeks. You're measuring my performance using sprint. Because I've lost 10 kilos, that's obviously going to affect my sprint. So we couldn't necessarily definitively say from an improvement in sprint performance over 6 weeks and weight loss that I maintained my muscle mass. We could just say that I had lost weight, and that is one of the reasons that my performance improved. When we're gathering anthropometric data, we want a minimum of baseline, midway, and the end. Ideally, you probably be checking every 2 weeks. So baseline one might be week 0, then you'd have intervention week 1, 2, 3, then 4, 5, and gather again on 6 potentially. So again, what you might find is that you monitor weight, BIA, and girths at baseline. You just do weight and girths halfway through, and you do your weight, BIA, and girths again at the end. So we want to make sure that if we're taking body composition, we're monitoring it throughout. Because what happens if you have a weight loss intervention, you expect to see 2 kilos of weight loss or X percentage of fat mass loss. But in fact, either your athlete totally overshoots it because they're not following your guidance and they might be losing muscle mass as well, or your athlete, you've prescribed a 500 calorie deficit and it's not working properly. You need to figure out then, why isn't it working and what should I be doing to change it with my intervention? So the examples I've used here often include a body composition change as one of your goals. That is not necessary at all. Quite a few students will be looking to have a weight maintenance and maybe a body composition maintenance, probably not a body composition maintenance. We're always looking to build lean mass and reduce fat mass, nearly always. But the goal might be maintenance. Weight and body composition may not be a priority for this athlete, but that doesn't mean that you should just ignore it, because for nearly every athlete, weight is a factor. So we still need to monitor weight to ensure that if weight maintenance is in the background, if weight isn't a priority, we want to make sure that whatever dietary or exercise interventions we're asking our athlete to do, there's a good likelihood they're going to impact weight. So we want to make sure, if weight maintenance is the goal, that they're not dropping weight or gaining weight based on the dietary and exercise information we've given them. So even if weight isn't the priority or body composition isn't the priority, you still need to monitor it to make sure it's being maintained.